Hey guys, tonight we drift into a world that lies right under our feet, quiet, grassy hills that most people drive past without even noticing. These mounds are like time capsules, some taller than the trees beside them, others hidden in plain sight. You walk closer, brushing your hand along the earth, and realize you're standing on the legacy of entire civilizations. Imagine if your local park's playground was secretly built atop a thousand-year-old temple. Yeah, you probably wouldn't survive the HOA meeting when that came out. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk across a quiet plain in the dim glow of evening. The air is heavy with the hum of summer insects, and the land rolls gently, broken only by a series of strange grass-covered hills. They don't look like natural rises. Their sides are too even, their tops too flat. Some stand in circles, some in long serpent shapes. You crouch down, pressing your palm into the soil, and it feels different, packed deliberately, layered by hands long gone. You realize these are not hills at all. They are monuments. A neutral voice drifts in to explain. Long before the United States existed, before Columbus, before even the first Norsemen touched North America, people lived here who shaped the land itself into ceremonial centers, burial sites, and markers aligned with the stars. Historians call them the mound builders, though that phrase lumps together many cultures: Adena, Hopewell, Mississippian. Together, their earthworks stretch from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. You wander further and notice how the evening light paints one mound gold, another in deep shadow. Some are small, like bumps in the grass, others tower several stories tall. One mainstream fact: Cahokia's Monk's Mound in Illinois still stands over 100 feet high and covers more ground than the Great Pyramid of Giza. You tilt your head, blinking. Wait, an American pyramid bigger than the Egyptian ones? Your high school teacher probably skipped that slide. Still, mysteries cling to these sites. A quirky tidbit often repeated is that early settlers claimed to find giant skeletons in the mounds, figures 8 or 9 feet tall. Most of those stories turned out to be exaggerations, mismeasurements, or just plain hoaxes, but they stuck in folklore. You picture an ancient giant rolling over in his earthen bed, yawning at the noise of passing lawnmowers. The quiet deepens as you sit on a mound slope, running your hand through the grass. The ground hums with presence, and your mind asks what archaeologists still debate. Were these mounds primarily religious temples, cosmic calendars, or expressions of political power? Historians still argue whether they were unified by belief or scattered independent groups who just shared a habit of stacking dirt very impressively. A breeze ruffles your hair. You smell wildflowers and soil. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls, as if keeping watch over this sleeping architecture. The air feels thick with forgotten stories, and you lean back, gazing at the stars. Their same constellations once guided the builders' hands. Their same silence now settles into your ears. You chuckle softly at the thought. Imagine explaining to your neighbor you spent 30 years of your life building an enormous pile of dirt. Trust me, Steve, it'll impress the gods. The mounds rise around you like gentle guardians. You notice how peaceful they seem, even though their histories are layered with struggle, migration, and change. This is only the first step on the journey. Ahead lies the story of where these people came from, how they learned to work the land, and how their cultures blossomed into some of the most mysterious civilizations on the continent. You stretch your legs, take a deep breath, and prepare to walk further back into time. You walk along the edge of the plain, the night air settling heavier, and you imagine the ground beneath your feet before any mound was raised. The land rolls with rivers and forests, vast and unbroken, a world without highways or fences. The wind seems to carry whispers of the first footprints here, tiny sparks of life moving across enormous distances. Neutral narration slips in. The earliest people to arrive in North America likely crossed from Siberia into Alaska over a land bridge called Beringia, sometime more than 13,000 years ago. From there, families spread across the continent, chasing herds, gathering roots and berries, learning to read the language of forests and rivers. One mainstream fact: by around 10,000 BCE, human groups were already living as far south as the tip of South America. You pause, thinking about the sheer mileage. No buses, no rollerblades, just really durable shoes made of animal hide. The air grows colder as you picture hunters following mammoths and mastodons across plains. You crouch, dragging your fingers through the dirt as though you might still see the faint press of their tracks. But when those massive animals disappeared, people adapted. They hunted deer, fished rivers, cracked nuts, roasted seeds. You smile faintly at the thought of ancient kids arguing over who got the last walnut. You move closer to a riverbank and hear the hush of water against stone. Early families camped here too. They lit fires, napped spearheads, and told stories you will never know. Over centuries, their numbers grew. Some chose to stay in fertile valleys, others roamed further. You picture canoes gliding along rivers carrying tools and songs. A quirky tidbit lingers in your ear. Some fringe theories suggest that ancient seafarers from Europe, Africa, or even the Middle East reached North America long before Columbus, perhaps teaching locals to build mounds. Archaeologists don't accept these ideas as mainstream, but they make for fascinating late-night campfire talk. You chuckle, imagining a bewildered Phoenician sailor stepping off his boat in Ohio, asking directions to the nearest temple. The deeper you walk, the more you notice how survival slowly shifted into settlement. The soil here is rich, dark, perfect for planting. You picture small patches of sunflowers, squash, and goosefoot sprouting beside huts. Food became something to store, not just chase, and with storage came roots, not just the vegetable kind, but roots of community. You lean against a tree, watching its leaves tremble in the evening wind. A neutral voice explains, archaeologists see evidence that by around 2000 BCE, groups in North America were experimenting with agriculture, blending wild gathering with early farming. Historians still argue whether farming began here independently or was influenced by contact with groups further south. You tilt your head, wondering if an ancient farmer once muttered the same thing you do when your tomatoes won't grow. Maybe next year. You walk further, the sound of owls and frogs echoing. In the distance, you picture bands of people meeting at crossroads of rivers, trading hides for tools, seeds for shells. They were still mobile, still flexible, but something was changing. Villages were forming. Memory was being planted in soil. You pause at the riverbank and notice your reflection trembling in the water. The stars shimmer above, just as they did thousands of years ago. Those first wanderers may have stared at the same constellations, wondering what lay beyond the horizon. They probably didn't imagine a future where strangers like you would stand here, trying to piece their lives back together from fragments of stone, clay, and earth. A smile flickers across your face. One joke bubbles up. Imagine being the first human to step into Kentucky and think, yeah, this feels like a good place to invent bourbon in a few thousand years. The night air cools and the grass bends beneath your steps. You walk deeper into time, past the fading echoes of mammoth hunters, toward the birth of villages and gardens that will one day give rise to mounds. The ground beneath your feet feels less like soil and more like a memory, waiting to be uncovered. You drift away from the riverbank, the whisper of water fading behind you, and step into a clearing where the air smells of damp soil and green shoots. It is morning now in your imagination, the sun rising soft and golden across a wide floodplain. The earth here is generous, and you sense why people would choose to settle, why they would trade the long march of wandering for the steady rhythm of planting and harvest. You kneel down and touch the soil, rich and dark from centuries of river floods. Seeds are pressed into the ground: squash, sunflowers, goosefoot. Corn, too, would eventually arrive from the south, carried slowly northward from Mexico. A mainstream fact stands out. By around 800 CE, maize farming had spread widely through much of eastern North America, transforming diets and fueling population growth. You lean closer, hearing the gentle rustle of leaves in fields that once stretched far wider than today's farms. The villages rise around you, not as towering cities yet, but as clusters of thatched huts, smoke curling lazily from their roofs. Children chase each other between storage pits filled with dried seeds, while dogs bark at shadows along the edge of the forest. You chuckle softly, imagining the same chaos as a modern neighborhood barbecue. Except here, the entertainment is a storyteller by the fire, not Netflix. Neutral narration threads through. These were the beginnings of permanence, the moment when rivers became highways, when gardens anchored communities to specific places. Families settled, and slowly, villages grew into chiefdoms, centers of ritual, and hubs of trade. Historians still argue whether this shift was gradual across scattered groups or whether the spread of maize was the spark that accelerated everything at once. A breeze stirs, and you walk among villagers hauling baskets of grain. The sound of wooden mortars pounding echoes like drums. These rhythms are steady, comforting, but beneath them you sense change. Food storage means more mouths to feed, and more mouths to feed means new systems of leadership. You picture elders debating near the fire, deciding who will lead the hunt, who will guard the stores, and, of course, who ate the last smoked fish. A quirky tidbit drifts in. Archaeologists once discovered caches of seeds preserved for centuries inside clay pots buried underground. Some of these ancient seeds were still viable when tested, meaning they could technically grow again today. You grin, picturing a hipster farmer's market selling vintage 800 CE squash for $20 a gourd. You wander out toward the riverside again, the flow steady and silver. Canoes glide by, carrying baskets of dried fish and woven mats. Villages sprout not just in one place, but across the valleys, linked by waterways. The land itself seems to hum with new patterns of life: birth, planting, harvest, and rest. The sun warms your face as you walk, and you catch the smell of roasting cornmeal in the air. A woman grinds seeds into flour. Nearby, children scatter kernels to the chickens. This is no longer the world of constant movement. Here, the land begins to shape identity. You feel it under your feet: stability, memory, legacy. Still, a question lingers like a shadow at the edge of the clearing. Were these settlements the result of independent discovery, or were they inspired by whispers of knowledge drifting up from Mesoamerican civilizations far to the south? Historians still argue whether cultural diffusion or independent invention planted the roots of agriculture in these soils. You pause at the edge of a mound that barely rises above the ground, more like a flattened circle than a towering hill. It is the seed of what will come, a practice not yet monumental but already symbolic. The people here are building more than villages. They are shaping landscapes, marking their place on earth with every handful of dirt. You laugh softly at the thought. Somewhere out there, the first guy who suggested stacking dirt into a ceremonial hill probably got side-eyed by his neighbors. And yet here you are, centuries later, standing on the proof he was right. The day fades toward evening again. The fields shimmer gold under the setting sun, and the sound of frogs swells from the marshes. You keep walking, guided by the scent of earth and smoke, toward the deeper mysteries of circles, walls, and earthworks that will soon rise higher than anything these villagers could have imagined. The sun dips low, and you follow the last amber streaks of light into a landscape where the earth itself seems arranged with intention. Before you, rounded shapes rise gently from the soil, low circles, their edges precise, as though someone pressed a compass into the ground centuries before compasses existed here. You walk slowly, tracing their outlines with your eyes, and realize these are no accidents. They are Adena earthworks. Neutral narration explains softly, the Adena culture flourished roughly from 1000 BCE to 200 CE across the Ohio Valley. They are often remembered for their circular earthworks and conical burial mounds, some modest in scale, others impressive in their preservation. One mainstream fact: the Grave Creek Mound in present-day West Virginia is about 62 feet tall and 240 feet wide, constructed entirely by hand, basket by basket of soil. You imagine how long it would take. Thousands of woven baskets lifted and emptied until the hill emerged from the ground like a slow, steady heartbeat. You walk into one of these circles, grass brushing against your knees. The air feels hushed inside, almost different, as if sound bends around the ring. You wonder if it once marked a gathering place for rituals, dances, or speeches. Maybe it was a calendar aligning with the sun and moon. Historians still argue whether these circles were primarily ceremonial, defensive, or symbolic of cosmic order. You tilt your head, squinting at the horizon. The alignment is too perfect to be mere chance. Children's laughter echoes in your imagination. Families move in and out of these spaces, their voices soft, their fires glowing at night. The Adena were not urban in the way later Mississippian cultures would be, but they were builders of meaning, shaping earth to mirror belief. A quirky tidbit trickles in. During the 19th century, some amateur excavators claimed to find inscribed tablets inside Adena mounds, engraved stones that supposedly bore mysterious writing. Most scholars now believe these were fakes planted for attention, but the idea of a secret script still tickles curiosity. You grin, imagining an ancient prankster carving "Kilroy was here" into a rock and burying it, just to confuse archaeologists 2,000 years later. The air cools, and a breeze flows across the open circles. You step back and view them from above in your mind's eye, ring after ring carved into the earth like fingerprints left by a culture seeking to impress itself on time. The shapes are so geometric, so deliberate, that you almost expect them to glow under moonlight, guiding the way to something beyond. You chuckle at a passing thought. If you squint, some of these circles look like the world's first crop circles. Except here, instead of aliens, it was just very determined humans with a lot of free evenings. The night deepens. You hear drums, steady, low, like the pulse of the earth itself. Fires flicker at the center of the circles, their smoke spiraling upward. The people here believed in cycles of life, death, and renewal. Burial mounds grew near these earthworks, marking places where ancestors returned to the soil. You sense reverence and understanding that the land itself was alive. You sit in the grass, feeling the ground firm beneath your hand. The circles don't shout like pyramids or stone monuments. Instead, they whisper, a softer way of saying, "We were here, we mattered." The simplicity carries weight, like a poem etched into the landscape rather than on paper. The stars wheel slowly overhead. Their positions line up with some of the circles, almost like clock hands. You wonder how many nights Adena people stood here, watching the same constellations, measuring time by light instead of calendars. And still, questions linger. Were these earthworks temples, observatories, or theaters of community life? Historians still argue whether their purpose can ever be known for certain, or if they held layers of meaning, shifting from one generation to the next. You let out a quiet laugh as a final thought drifts through. Imagine explaining to your kids that the weekend family activity is hauling dirt into a perfect circle, and they thought mowing the lawn was bad. The wind hushes again. You rise, brushing off the grass, and step beyond the quiet rings. Ahead lies a broader horizon where earthworks grow grander, stretching for miles, and where trade networks sparkle like hidden threads binding distant peoples together. You step beyond the quiet rings and into a corridor of rivers, the water moving like dark silk under moonlight. Canoes slide along without a splash, and your ears catch a rhythm, the soft knock of oars, the rattle of shell beads, the clink of copper against stone. Trade is the music here, and you follow it as if the current itself tugs your ankles. On every bend you glimpse baskets of obsidian glinting like frozen night, bundles of mica shimmering like captured dawn, and cords of woven fiber that smell faintly of riverweed and smoke. Neutral narration eases in. Between about 100 BCE and 500 CE, communities archaeologists label Hopewell, stitched together a vast exchange network, often called the Hopewell Interaction Sphere, across much of eastern North America. One mainstream fact: geochemical studies show that obsidian found in Ohio earthworks came from Obsidian Cliff in present-day Yellowstone, and rolled copper ornaments often traced to the Lake Superior region. You blink at the distance. That is not a quick errand. That is prehistoric 2-day shipping with an asterisk the size of the continent. You kneel where a trader steadies his canoe and lifts a carved stone pipe, the bowl shaped like a hawk with wings tucked tight. Pipes like this travel far, offerings and status markers as much as tools. The trader barters for shell beads spiraled from the Gulf Coast, their satin curves catching the light. You run a thumb along one and feel the sea in your imagination, the hush of waves that no inland forest knows. Trade routes braid water with footpaths, and your senses fill with aromas: smoked fish, resin, crushed leaves, distant fires. At a bend in the river, a woman unwraps thin sheets of mica, translucent, rosy, and cool to the touch. You hold a flake to the sky, and it turns the stars to ghosts. Historians still argue whether these shimmering sheets served as ritual mirrors, window-like offerings, or inlays for ceremonial art. The effect is hypnotic either way. The material seems halfway between stone and light, as if cut from sunrise. A quirky tidbit drifts on the night breeze. For more than a century, storytellers have whispered that enormous quantities of copper mined around Lake Superior must mean old-world mariners, Phoenicians, Minoans, take your pick, crossed the Atlantic to haul it away. Archaeologists treat that as a fringe idea. The mines and trade can be explained by local technologies and networks. You smile at the image anyway. A Bronze Age sailor docking his trireme and asking, "Is there a gift shop?" You leave the shoreline and follow a path to a clearing where geometry takes command. In the grass, you sense edges long buried, great squares and circles that once rose waist-high, their embankments crisp. The Newark earthworks in Ohio spring to mind, immense shapes traced into the land connected by long, straight avenues. Neutral narration adds, researchers have argued that the Newark octagon appears aligned to lunar cycles, possibly tracking the 18.6-year lunar standstill. You tip your head watching the moon drift behind thin clouds, and the angle feels deliberate. Not a lighthouse exactly, but a slow clock for a slow sky. The traders gather in this open space, baskets thumping down like soft drums. Copper breastplates gleam, grizzly bear teeth, processed and rare, decorate cords, freshwater pearls wink from stitched cloth, knife blades of obsidian sleep in leather wraps. The scene hums with profit and promise. You hear the murmur of comparisons, weight, color, sheen, sharpness, and catch a joke traded with the goods. If it breaks in transit, you can return it to the river. You stifle a laugh and imagine a generous lifetime warranty, valid until the next flood. Stories ride the circuit as eagerly as goods. A traveler explains that people upriver hosted a feast. 5 fires, drum beats rolling like thunder, elders speaking under a painted night. Another trader describes a burial ceremony where mica and pearl were laid with the departed, the objects transformed from wealth into words, carried across a threshold. You feel the weight of that belief. Things are not only things, they are sentences spoken to the cosmos. A neutral voice clarifies gently, Hopewell groups did not form a single empire. Instead, they were communities connected by shared styles, rituals, and exchange. One village's artisans excelled at stone pipes, another at copperwork, a third at shell ornaments. Historians still argue whether these networks were coordinated by powerful leaders or sustained through reciprocal gift-giving and kinship ties, more like a web than a wheel. You picture both possibilities and decide the truth might have shifted over time, like a river that keeps its name while moving its banks. Twilight deepens, and you follow a procession toward a low platform where negotiators sit. They do not shout. They trade phrases like smooth stones, respectful, measured, laced with humor. A dancer steps around the circle, bells shaking at the ankles, and you realize the market merges with ceremony. In this world, economics and cosmology are cousins who share a tent. You crouch near a bundle of raw copper, green-edged and heavy, and feel how it cools your palm. It will become blade, pendant, plaque, or be left as a raw nod to the earth's own beauty. You imagine a craftsperson hammering by firelight and kneeling and shaping, the metal ringing like a muted bell. The finished piece will travel again, maybe 100 miles, maybe 1,000, collecting fingerprints of admiration like a passport filled with stamped smiles. A second quirky current pops up from an old newspaper memory. Scattered reports of Roman coins found in American fields are sometimes paraded as proof of ancient Europeans visiting the Hopewell. Archaeologists usually conclude those coins were dropped in modern times, carried by collectors, or lost in playful hoaxes. Even so, the notion lingers like a catchy chorus, fun to hum even if it's off-key. You shrug and think, if a Roman tourist had shown up, someone would have sold him beads and asked for a 5-star review. The moon climbs, hazy and large, and the earthworks seem to reawaken under the silver wash. You realize distance has shrunk in a way you didn't expect, because rivers are roads and ceremonies are signposts. The network is not made of stone and timber alone. It is made of meetings, obligations, and remembered faces at the water's edge. You picture a shell necklace that has known 5 owners, each adding their own thread of meaning until the object feels heavier than it weighs. Neutral narration returns for a beat. Across the Hopewell sphere, artisans produced animal effigy pipes so lifelike that modern viewers can identify species: hawks, herons, panthers, bears. One mainstream fact: archaeologists confirm these artifacts often accompanied burials, placed alongside mica, copper, and carved stone, indicating complex ritual practices. You exhale slowly, aware that beauty here is not a luxury. It is a language. A soft chuckle escapes you as your stomach grumbles. Somewhere, someone is grilling fish wrapped in leaves, and the scent is both ancient and irresistible. You imagine sidling up to a vendor and asking for a combo meal: 1 pipe, 2 shell bracelets, and a small stew. The vendor raises an eyebrow as if to say, "We don't do fries." Fair enough. You take one last look at the exchange ground. Goods are packed away, promises spoken, plans for the next gathering already seated. In the hush that follows, you sense the longer arc. With every journey, ideas move too: techniques, myths, songs, the way a certain leader speaks, the way a certain artisan cuts stone. What begins as trade becomes transmission, and transmission becomes tradition. Historians still argue whether specific ceremonial symbols traveled with the goods or grew independently like similar flowers in distant fields. Either way, you see petals opening everywhere the rivers meet. The canoes push off. The night folds back over the clearing, and the earthworks return to their patient geometry. You step to the bank, feel cold water lick your toes, and look west, where obsidian's home lies among mountains and hot springs. You look north to Copper's Islands, south to the Shells, east to Mica's ridges, and realize you stand at the crossroads of a continent made smaller by human hands, patient strokes of paddle and foot. You breathe in, let the river carry your thoughts, and prepare to follow how belief, power, and artistry will rise with the next age's mounds. You follow the river trail away from the market, and the night grows eerily quiet. The grass whispers against your legs, the mounds crouch low under starlight, and a different kind of story begins to rise, one not told by artifacts or aligned embankments, but by rumors. You feel the tug of old campfire tales, carried on the lips of settlers, travelers, and storytellers who wanted to believe the earth hid something bigger. Neutral narration steps in. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, settlers opening mounds in the Ohio Valley and Mississippi Basin claimed to uncover skeletons far larger than ordinary human remains. Newspaper reports described figures 7, 8, even 9 feet tall. One mainstream fact: professional archaeologists who later investigated these claims generally found them to be either exaggerated measurements, misidentified animal bones, or outright hoaxes. Yet the myth of giants in the mounds refused to fade. You crouch in the shadow of a mound and imagine what it must have been like. A farmer, prying into the soil, lantern trembling in his hand, convinced he'd unearthed a buried race. He runs into town breathless, declaring giants walk the land, and everyone leans forward over their pints to listen. You chuckle softly, thinking, that's basically the prehistoric version of going viral. Still, the stories grew wilder. Some insisted these giants had double rows of teeth, or that they wielded copper weapons taller than a man. A quirky tidbit: one 19th-century writer swore that the Smithsonian Institution secretly carted away giant skeletons to cover up evidence of a lost race. Modern historians dismiss this as conspiracy theory, but the rumor still drifts online, like a stubborn dandelion seed you can't pull from your lawn. You step onto the mound slope and feel the soil firm underfoot. The air thickens with imagination. Were the Adena and Hopewell carving their hills for ordinary ancestors, or were they memorializing a memory of larger-than-life beings? Historians still argue whether the giant legends came from misread bones, cultural misunderstandings, or from genuine oral traditions that inflated over time. You glance around, as if expecting an enormous shadow to stretch across the grass. Nothing moves. Just crickets, just wind. A laugh escapes you at the absurdity. Picture a giant trying to squeeze into one of those thatched huts, knees bent, back hunched, grumbling, "Seriously, who designed this place?" The humor breaks the tension, but the unease lingers, like the scent of damp earth after rain. You walk further into the field. Lanterns flicker in your mind's eye. 19th century diggers pulling bones, arguing over measurements, writing hasty articles. You imagine how quickly a normal femur might look enormous to someone primed for wonder. Neutral narration notes. Many of the giant skeleton stories arose during a period of fascination with biblical literalism, when people sought proof of races described in Scripture. The mounds became a convenient canvas for those beliefs. You run your hand along the grass. It feels cool, ordinary, yet extraordinary because of the stories buried beneath. You realize that myths of giants say less about the Edina or Hopewell and more about the imaginations of later generations who couldn't quite believe native peoples had built such wonders without supernatural help. That disbelief itself is a story, a mirror held up to biases of the past. A gust of wind rattles leaves and you startle, half expecting a towering silhouette. Instead, only the stars shimmer. You smile at your own nerves. "Of course," you whisper. "If giants did exist, they'd be terrible at hide-and-seek. You'd see their heads over the trees." The mound lies silent again, indifferent to the tales spun around it. You take a deep breath. Whether giants walked here or not, the truth is already grand enough. Generations of hands shaping landscapes, crafting art, weaving networks of trade and belief. No legends required. Yet the legend lingers, because humans crave the extraordinary, the what-if, the thrill of something lurking just out of reach. You walk down the slope slowly, grass brushing your shins. The night is still, but in that stillness, you hear both fact and fancy, woven together like twin threads. One is the steady voice of archaeology, the other, the restless murmur of folklore. Together, they make the story richer. At the edge of the field, you pause. The legends of giants fade behind you, but ahead lies something even larger than rumor. A city of the sun, a metropolis built on Earth itself, where thousands lived, worked, and dreamed beneath the shadow of towers of soil. The air changes as you step forward, a heaviness like the hush before a concert begins. The ground stretches wide, flat, and open, but in the distance a hill rises, no natural hill, but a monument layered basket by basket. You walk toward it, craning your neck until you feel small in its shadow. This is Cahokia, the city of the sun. Neutral narration enters. Cahokia flourished from around 1050 to 1350 CE in what is now southern Illinois, near modern-day St. Louis. At its height, it may have housed 20,000 people or more, making it the largest city north of Mexico in pre-Columbian North America. One mainstream fact, Monk's Mound, its central platform, still looms today at over 100 feet high and covering 14 acres, larger at its base than Egypt's Great Pyramid of Giza. You stare upward, wondering how many thousands of hands carried baskets of soil, spilling them out to raise this mountain of human determination. You begin climbing its slope, your feet pressing into a path trodden by countless others. The grass parts under your shoes and sweat beads at your temples. Imagine doing this climb daily, perhaps to deliver tribute, join ceremonies, or witness leaders addressing the people. When you reach the top, the city sprawls below you like a tapestry. Rows of houses with thatched roofs, smoke drifting from hearths, fields of corn and beans, plazas where voices rise in songs and debate. A quirky tidbit flutters in your mind. In the 19th century, locals reportedly held picnics and even horse races atop Monk's Mound, as if the ancient city were just a convenient park. One account claims a preacher gave a sermon there, calling it a natural hill. You chuckle. Imagine a Cahokian citizen looking up from the afterlife, arms crossed, muttering, "Really? Natural?" The view from the summit is breathtaking. To the east, the sun would rise directly over certain alignments, filling the city with golden fire. You picture thousands gathering in the grand plaza below, drums echoing, shells rattling, voices weaving into chants. This was not a quiet village. This was a metropolis buzzing with traders, farmers, artisans, and leaders. Historians still argue whether Cahokia was ruled by a powerful chief, a council of elites, or something in between. But the scale of the city shows authority was not just symbolic. It was organized, commanding, and deeply tied to belief. You descend into the heart of the city. Houses cluster in neighborhoods, each with small yards where corn dries on racks and children chase dogs through dust. The smell of roasted food drifts between alleys. You pass artisans hammering copper into ornaments, potters shaping clay vessels with spiral designs, weavers knotting nets for fishing. Life here hums with energy, every corner a workshop of purpose. The plaza opens before you, vast and alive. At night it would blaze with fires. By day it pulses with markets and games. You pause as laughter ripples, young men tossing a game ball with curved sticks, women bartering gourds for woven mats, elders leaning on canes to watch. You grin. Basically, 1,000 years ago, this was their version of a farmer's market mixed with the NFL. Yet beneath the bustle lies power. Ceremonial buildings line the plaza, raised on their own platforms. Leaders climb them, speaking down to the people. Offerings are laid out in orderly rows. Priests watch the sky, measuring time by stars and seasons. You feel eyes on you, though no one is there, an echo of authority embedded in the soil itself. You wander to the edges of the city. Beyond the palisade walls, wooden timbers sunk deep, forming a barrier. You see fields of maize, shimmering gold under the sun. Farmers bend their backs in unison, planting, tending, harvesting. These fields fed the city, sustaining its thousands. Neutral narration reminds you, Cahokia's success was rooted in agriculture, particularly the mass cultivation of maize, beans, and squash, the three sisters that provided a balanced diet and stable surplus. At night, the city transforms. Fires spark across neighborhoods, their smoke curling into stars. From the plaza, music rises, flutes, rattles, drums. You sit among them, tasting roasted corn, feeling warmth from strangers who would treat you as kin if you offered friendship. The city feels alive, like a heart beating in rhythm with the cosmos. Still, questions whisper. Historians still argue whether Cahokia was sustained more by faith or fear, whether its leaders commanded loyalty through cosmic ritual or through military might. Was this city united in devotion or in obligation? You tilt your head at the great mound behind you, wondering if its silence leans more toward temple or throne. A laugh bubbles as you imagine a Cahokian teen rolling their eyes. Ugh, Mom, do we really have to go to another ceremony? The sun will rise whether I'm there or not. Some complaints transcend centuries. The night deepens, the fires burn low, and you walk once more to the foot of Monk's Mound. Its bulk towers above, silent but not mute, carrying centuries of footsteps, ceremonies, and secrets. You press your palm to its slope, feel its cool firmness, and sense the city around you breathing. Cahokia is not gone. It lingers in soil, in stories, in the very air of the Mississippi Valley. You take a long breath and turn toward the eastern horizon, where the sky brightens faintly. Dawn will rise again, and with it the wooden circles, giant calendars of timber, that once caught the first rays of the sun. Dawn edges over the valley as you turn from the plaza toward a ring that once stood in ordered ranks. Dew beads on the grass, a faint thread of wood smoke hangs low. You step into an arc where post holes dot the soil like inverted constellations, each circle scored by time. This is not a ruin in the usual sense. It is a shape that still works, a clock big enough to stand inside, a place that makes everyone look the same way at the same moment. Neutral narration drifts in. Archaeologists uncovered several timber circles at Cahokia, usually called Woodhenge, west of Monk's Mound. The posts were set in carefully spaced holes to form rings whose sightlines mark the rising and setting sun on equinoxes and solstices. One mainstream fact: on equinox mornings, the sun can be observed rising in line with a designated post and the crest of Monk's Mound, a horizon alignment suggesting the circles functioned as public calendars for ceremonies and work. You trace the ring with your feet, counting where posts once stood, dozens of markers, each a wooden sentence. The timbers were likely red cedar, fragrant and rot-resistant, chosen for durability and meaning. Crews hauled trunks from the bottoms, trimmed them, measured by cord and sightline, and set each pole true. You smile at the thought, no snooze button on this alarm clock, miss sunrise and you're rescheduling the solstice. You crouch and touch the rim of a socket. Charcoal flecks cling like fire's memory. The walls are grooved by tools. The circle is generous, wide enough for a crowd, and precise enough to earn the sky's respect. Historians still argue whether Woodhenge primarily served as an observatory to schedule planting and ritual, a ceremonial theater where people assembled to witness authority, or both at once, a public calendar braided to civic life. In your mind, the posts rise again, straight, reddish, shoulder-wide. A low platform stands at the edge, a timber stage where a priest or leader may welcome dawn and interpret its path. The city waits in the plaza. Children clutch parents' hands. Traders fall silent. When first light edges up, a bright thread slips between two posts and points, like a fingertip, toward Monk's Mound. A shared breath leaves the crowd, and the day feels confirmed. You walk the inner path and imagine the labor behind the elegance. Posts do not plant themselves. Crews dig sockets, set poles, wedge them firm with packed soil and stone, and perhaps paint or burnish them for protection and ceremony. Neutral narration adds, experimental reconstructions show circles of this scale can be laid out with cord, simple surveying, and patient iteration. No metal required, just exacting craft. You picture a foreman squinting along a line while someone mutters, "A hair to the left, now hold." At intervals, small offerings might have rested at the bases, shell beads, flakes of mica, seeds, a whisper of smoke. Calendars in this world are not mere schedules, they are bridges between stories and seasons. If the equinox marks balance, leaders might proclaim renewals of obligation. If the solstice crowns the sun, dances begin, fields open to planting, and feasts ripple across neighborhoods like rings from a thrown stone. The circle keeps time, but here, time also keeps people. A quirky tidbit slips in from the fringe. Because the name invites comparison, a few enthusiasts once claimed Celtic voyagers, or even Druidic sages, taught this design to Cahokians, and others joked about a prehistoric UFO landing grid. Archaeologists greet such claims with patient smiles and more measuring. The resemblance to European henges has more to do with humans everywhere watching the same sky than with secret visitors piloting across oceans or galaxies. You pause at the Western Arc and listen to ordinary life stirring beyond the ritual ground. Somewhere a pot boils, somewhere a baby fusses, somewhere a copper worker taps a steady heartbeat on metal. The circle gathers all of that inside an extraordinary frame, a reminder that astronomy is also a social art. Historians still argue whether posts were replaced on fixed cycles, whether circles were rebuilt to refine alignments, or whether multiple rings served different ritual eras. Neutral narration widens the view. Excavations revealed several overlapping rings of different diameters, showing that Woodhenge was not a single monument frozen in time, but a tradition, adjusted, recited, or expanded as generations passed. One mainstream fact: visitors today can stand at a reconstructed circle at Cahokia Mound State Historic Site and watch equinox sunrises from designated points, an echo of ceremonies that may have unfolded here 1,000 years ago. You lay your palm where a central post once anchored the layout and feel how the circle gathers the world: sun's path, city's breath, river's glitter, the rustle of maize beyond the palisade. A joke drifts from a sleepy spectator in your imagination. If the sun doesn't rise exactly on time, do we get a refund? The priest would likely smile and gesture to the horizon as if to say, "The guarantee comes from the universe." You step back and look again. Without timbers, it is only a pattern of holes and a memory drawn in dirt, yet you can't unsee its architecture. That is the power of intention carved into a landscape. Once you learn the note, the silence still hums with it. Even without posts, your eyes now check the horizon as naturally as glancing at a wristwatch. Neutral narration flickers with detail. Red cedar carried symbolic weight across many Eastern woodlands traditions, used in ritual fires and protective charms. While direct meanings at Cahokia remain partly inferred, the choice of durable, fragrant wood would suit a monument meant to carry presence across seasons. Historians still argue whether color, smoke, and sound here were choreographed like a civic liturgy, or whether gatherings felt looser, more like festivals where awe and commerce mingled. One last grin surfaces as you imagine a carver engraving instructions on a plank. Step 1. Assemble circle. Step 2. Align with cosmos. Step 3. Do not misplace the sun. It sounds absurd, but the accuracy argues otherwise. Someone kept meticulous track. And if a post leaned a bit, you can almost hear a supervisor sigh, then call for wedges while muttering a prayer to precision. The day brightens, and with it, the promise of what follows the counting of dawns. Feasts and festivals that pour through plazas after the timing is set, the music and smoke that turn a calendar into celebration. You turn from the ring, carrying its quiet arithmetic like a second heartbeat, and walk toward the city's open space where fires will flare and songs will rise with the coming night. You step away from the wooden circle, the echoes of measured sunrise still warming your thoughts, and follow a trail into the wide plaza. The air smells of roasting maize, wood smoke, and something sweet, perhaps berries stewing in clay pots. It is no longer a solemn dawn, but a lively evening, the time when feasts transform the city into a festival. You walk closer, and the space glows with dozens of fires, each one a small sun beating in rhythm with the great mound's shadow. Neutral narration sets the scene. Gatherings at Cahokia were not just about daily chores or rituals. Archaeological evidence, animal bones, food remains, and artifacts suggests large-scale feasting events brought people together for ceremonies, alliances, and celebration. One mainstream fact: at some sites, archaeologists found remains of hundreds of deer consumed at once, hinting at enormous banquets that may have fed thousands. You widen your eyes. Hundreds of deer at one meal, basically the first all-you-can-eat buffet, but without the sneeze guard. You sit on the packed earth of the plaza as musicians take their places. Flutes trill like birds, rattles shake like wind through leaves, drums roll like thunder on the horizon. The sound pulls your heartbeat into rhythm. Around you, families spread mats, laying out bowls of corn cakes, roasted squash, dried berries, and fish pulled fresh from rivers. You're handed a steaming bowl and take a careful taste. It's smoky, earthy, filling, as if the land itself had been simmered into stew. The laughter swells as games begin. Men run with a ball, knocking it along with curved sticks. Children chase after them, shrieking in delight. Traders weave through the crowd, showing off carved shell pendants, copper ornaments, stone pipes shaped like animals. You grin at the scene and mutter, "Honestly, this is like Comic-Con, but with fewer costumes and way more roasted venison." A quirky tidbit slips into the night air. Some early French explorers who encountered descendants of mound-building cultures in the 17th century wrote about stickball games so fierce that entire villages paused to watch. The matches could last for days, and wagers were heavy. Food, goods, even honor itself. You picture yourself awkwardly trying to join in, only to trip, drop the ball, and hear the collective groan of 1,000 spectators. The fires burn brighter. Dancers step into the circle, feathers catching sparks of light, their shadows spinning across the plaza. Some wear masks of animals, wolf, bird, serpent, as if their bodies borrow strength from the creatures. The movements are hypnotic, feet pounding, arms sweeping, voices rising in chants. You sway unconsciously, your pulse caught in the drumbeat. Neutral narration explains softly. Ceremonies at Cahokia often blended the cosmic with the communal. Feasts and dances reinforced political authority, honored ancestors, and aligned the people with celestial cycles. Historians still argue whether leaders wielded these gatherings mainly to reinforce control, or whether the rituals genuinely bound the community through shared belief. You watch the faces in the firelight, laughing, intent, moved, and think perhaps the answer was both. Children dart between fires, clutching sweet treats of roasted pumpkin or wild berries. Dogs weave through legs, tails wagging as they hunt scraps. Somewhere a storyteller begins weaving a tale of origins, his words carrying over the crackle of flames. You lean in, though you can't understand the language. The cadence alone is spell enough. Your mind wanders to the sheer logistics. Thousands gathered here means thousands fed, housed, and managed. Fires must be tended, food gathered, drums carved, schedules kept by the Woodhenge calendar. It is a machine, powered not by gears, but by people working in harmony. You chuckle. Imagine the poor organizer explaining, yes, we need 200 deer, 500 baskets of corn, and enough firewood to keep this party going until sunrise. No, Gary, you can't just bring chips. The night thickens, and smoke curls upward like prayers. Sparks rise and vanish among the stars, as if the sky is answering. The sound of rattles and flutes grows wilder, building to a crest. You close your eyes and let the rhythm carry you until time itself feels blurred. Present and past overlapping like voices in a choir. A final note from neutral narration. Feasting at Cahokia likely carried multiple meanings, solidifying alliances between clans, reinforcing obligations, and celebrating cycles of planting and harvest. One mainstream fact. Archaeologists found evidence of black drink, a caffeinated beverage made from holly leaves, likely used in ritual purification before ceremonies. You grin at the idea. Essentially a prehistoric espresso shot to kickstart the festivities. As the drums slow and the dancers retreat, the plaza glows with lingering warmth. Families settle, full and weary, murmuring into the night. You stretch your legs and yawn. The fires crackle low, and the mound looms in the background like a watchful elder. This feast has ended, but the cycle continues. Tomorrow, another planting, another sunrise, another gathering. You rise quietly, brushing dust from your hands, and step into the darkness beyond the fires. Ahead lie the burial mounds, quieter still, where offerings wait in silence and the living commune with the afterlife. You walk on from the hush of burial mounds, and the silence sharpens into tension. The air feels heavier, not with ritual, but with unease. You come upon wooden palisades rising tall, their pointed tops blackened by smoke. Inside the walls, the ground is packed and hardened by countless footsteps, and every sound, the bark of a dog, the creak of a gate, feels like it carries too much weight. You are in a time when warriors stride the fields, when villages fortify themselves against neighbors and strangers alike. Neutral narration sets the stage. By the 13th century, many Mississippian towns, including Cahokia in its later years, built defensive palisades, sometimes strengthened with bastions for archers. Archaeological evidence shows repeated repairs and rebuilds, suggesting conflict or at least the constant expectation of it. One mainstream fact, excavations at Cahokia revealed a 2-mile-long palisade with watchtowers, enclosing the central precinct around Monk's Mound. You picture the sheer labor, thousands of logs dragged, sunk, and bound together into walls that said, "Enter carefully." You walk through the gate and your skin tingles. Inside, warriors practice with bows, arrows tipped with sharpened stone or bone. Others grip long spears, the shafts smoothed by oil and sweat. Their eyes are sharp, scanning not only the horizon, but each other, because power is never only about outside threats. Historians still argue whether these fortifications reflected frequent warfare or more symbolic displays of dominance, whether the walls kept enemies out or subjects in. The plaza here feels different from the one you left behind. Instead of feasts and dances, the air is taut, as if waiting. You hear smiths hammering copper into breastplates, the clang echoing like muted thunder. Women carry water, their steps brisk, while children peek from behind doorways. You smile briefly at the thought. Even in a fortified city, kids still sneak out to chase dogs and drive their parents mad. A quirky tidbit slips in. Explorers centuries later recorded some native groups using chunky stones. Discs rolled across a field, while warriors hurled spears to strike them mid-roll. The game was entertainment, but also training in precision and timing. You picture young men practicing by torchlight, half sport, half rehearsal for survival. You grin. Basically, the original extreme sport, except losing wasn't just losing, it was missing dinner. You lean against the inside of the palisade and watch a group of leaders argue near the gate. Their gestures are broad, their voices clipped. Perhaps it's about tribute owed, or rumors of raids upriver. Perhaps someone broke a treaty, or a hunting ground boundary was crossed. The details blur across centuries, but the posture, the tilt of heads, the flare of nostrils, is timeless. Neutral narration clarifies. Skeletal remains at some Mississippian sites show evidence of conflict, arrow wounds, blunt force injuries, though large-scale battles remain uncertain. Instead, raids, skirmishes, and displays of force may have dominated. Historians still argue whether Cahokia's decline was hastened by internal strife, resource pressure, or clashes with neighboring groups. The truth likely braided all three. You walk deeper into the settlement, past rows of homes. The smell of smoke and sweat thickens. Women mend baskets, but their eyes flick up at the palisade every few breaths. Elders sit together, whispering as if old stories might shield them. You pause at a well-trodden practice ground where warriors line up, bows raised in unison. Arrows fly, thudding into straw targets shaped vaguely like enemies. You wince at the sudden flurry of sound, then chuckle softly. Imagine being the one guy who forgot to duck when everyone loosed at once. The night creeps in, and torches flare along the wall. Shadows of guards stretch across the plaza, tall and wavering. The watch is constant, the rhythm unrelenting. Even celebration now carries the undercurrent of defense. You realize how different this feels from the feasts you witnessed. There, joy bound the community. Here, fear welds it. Both are powerful, both necessary, both fragile. You slip outside the palisade in your mind, into the fields beyond. The maize still grows, golden and steady, but the tension follows you. To farm here is to farm with eyes on the horizon. You stoop to pick up a dropped arrowhead, smooth and sharp, and it feels less like a tool and more like a question. A breeze sweeps across the fields, bending stalks and ripples. Somewhere in that sound lies the uncertainty of a people balancing between abundance and threat. The mounds still stand, the rituals still burn, but the walls say something else. Stability is never guaranteed. Historians still argue whether Cahokia fell first to conflict within or to pressures without. The palisade is silent on the matter, but its scars speak volumes. You turn from the wall, feeling its presence even as it fades into the night. Ahead lies a city no longer growing but crumbling, a place where plazas empty, fields falter, and silence spreads wider than any wall can hold. You step beyond the last line of torches into a dawn that feels colder than it should. Mist lies low over the fields, and the stalks don't rustle the way they used to. Inside the walls, people still wake, still light fires, still carry water, but the rhythm slips. The plaza looks too wide, the houses a little too far apart. Beneath your feet, the packed earth remembers footsteps it no longer receives. You pass a granary and find it half empty, baskets showing their ribs. Neutral narration threads in. Climate records from tree rings and lake sediments point to episodes of drought and shifting rainfall across the mid-continent in the 12th, 14th centuries, the kind of slow pressure that can turn surplus into worry. One mainstream fact. By the mid-1300s, Cahokia's central precinct was largely abandoned. You walk to a field and kneel, crumbling soil between your fingers. It is lighter, dustier, not the lush loam from earlier seasons. Farmers still plant, but they plant with glances toward the sky. A breeze skims across the stalks and you catch yourself making a dry joke to no one. So the supply chain is having a moment, again. Inside the palisade, repairs patch repairs. Fresh logs rise where old ones rotted or burned. Historians still argue whether repeated rebuilding points to raids, internal unrest, or simply the grind of maintenance in a city that never stopped breathing until, slowly, it did. You pass a work crew wedging timbers into a trench. The steady thunk of soil packing sounds more like counting than hope. At the base of a platform, you watch leaders speak to a dwindling crowd. Their gestures still carry authority, but their eyes wander to fields, to the thin smoke rising from too few hearths. You imagine the private meetings that follow, inventories of grain, lists of obligations, a line of messengers no one wants to greet. You smirk at the thought of an ancient agenda item that never changes. New business, everything. Neutral narration returns. Excavations reveal episodes of burning in some neighborhoods, structures reconfigured, and palisades shifted over time. A palimpsest of disruption. Pollen records suggest heavy use of local wood for fuel and construction, followed by vegetation changes that read like exhaustion and regrowth. Scholars debate whether environmental strain led the procession or merely marched beside political and social pressures. The river glints dull pewter. Floods in one decade, drought in another. Traders still arrive, but fewer. The obsidian gleam dims, mica thins, copper shows more hammer marks and fewer flourishes. You hold a pendant and feel the weight of what it implies. Beauty gives ground first to function, then to necessity, then to nothing at all. A quirky tidbit surfaces from later storytellers. Some claimed a fiery omen crossed the sky, a comet or meteor shower that frightened the people into abandoning their city. It's more folktale than fact, an echo of how humans frame endings with spectacle. Still, you tilt your chin upward and picture a long white tail, and you understand why the tail lingers. You drift through a neighborhood where weeds nose up between packed earth floors. A child's toy, simple, carved, lies where a doorway used to be. In the distance, you hear a single drum, a thin line of sound unspooling across empty space. Neutral narration softens the edges. In the final phases, people dispersed into smaller communities up and down the valleys, carrying pieces of ceremony with them. One house style becomes another. One pot form learns a new curve. Debate continues over whether disease played a role here, though epidemics linked to later contacts would carry far greater force. You step onto the great mound one more time. The climb feels longer than before. At the summit, the plaza below shows bare patches where crowds once stood shoulder to shoulder. The wind replies to everything, which is rude but consistent. You grin despite yourself. Tough audience, I'll be here all century. On the way down, you pass a post hole where a cedar once stood and catch the ghost of fragrance still living in the soil. The calendar it held kept perfect time, but time kept moving anyway. Precision in service of a world that refuses to sit still. Beyond the palisade, families bundle their households onto backs and sleds, loading baskets with what matters and what will fit. A grandmother ties polished shells into a child's hair, not because there will be a feast where they're going, but because leaving without beauty feels like losing twice. You watch them start along the river road, a longer commute than any city deserves. Another quiet joke nudges your lips. If you ever complained about traffic, try relocating an address. The river keeps its schedule. Neutral narration widens. The Mississippian world did not vanish with this city. Other centers thrived before and after. Etowah, Moundville, Spiro, each with its own arc of growth and contraction. Early European accounts later encountered chiefdoms with plazas, rituals, and warfare that echoed older patterns even as new constellations of power took shape. The line from here to there is not a cliff. It is a braid of rivers. Even in a thinning city, ceremony flickers. A small group gathers at dusk, rekindling a fire at a mound's shoulder. They speak names, pour a measure of drink to the ground, lift a song that doesn't try to fill the plaza, just a doorway, just a room. You stand outside and listen as the song finds the walls and learns their emptiness, then carries on anyway. Night gathers. Owls write their looping questions into the dark, and crickets tally what remains. You walk the outer paths, and the city's silhouette appears almost natural now, as if the mounds were always hills, the avenues always chants. That illusion is the final power of abandonment. Intention dissolves until only shape lingers. You pause where the road bends toward smaller towns and quieter fields. The air smells of wet clay and wood smoke, and the stars look closer than they did at the height of noise. You feel no tidy moral, only a careful understanding. Cities are stories told in soil, and every story includes the part where a voice softens, where the page turns, where the next chapter is written somewhere else. You turn toward that somewhere, toward those who will arrive later, misunderstand and rename, toward scholars who will sift and argue, toward the stubborn grass that will keep the contours when memory forgets. You take one last breath of this cooling place and step into the path the river draws, letting the current carry you to the next echo. The river carries you forward into another century, and when you step ashore, the world has changed. Wooden palisades rot quietly, plazas sprout weeds, and the great mounds are softened by grass. Yet now, new voices move through the valley, voices speaking European tongues, scribbling in journals, mapping rivers. You watch them stumble across these earthworks, wide-eyed, unsure of what they are seeing. Neutral narration leans in. By the time European colonists and explorers arrived in the Mississippi Valley in the 16th and 17th centuries, Cahokia and many mound centers had long been abandoned. But the earthworks remained, mysterious and imposing. One mainstream fact: Hernando de Soto's expedition in the 1540s reported encountering large native towns with mounds and plazas in the southeast, proof that mound-building traditions still thrived even as Cahokia's heyday had passed. You picture the Spaniards sweating in armor, blinking at the sight of towns that contradicted their neat assumptions of wilderness. You walk beside a group of French explorers pushing upstream in the 1600s. They stop at an earthen rise, grass-covered and silent, and argue in hushed tones. One insists it must be a natural hill. Another suggests it was built by some vanished race, Greeks, Romans, perhaps even survivors of Atlantis. You can't help but grin. Basically, the original version of internet comment sections. Lots of theories, very little fact-checking. These newcomers often overlooked or dismissed the idea that native peoples had built the mounds. A quirky tidbit: some settlers in the 18th and 19th centuries spun elaborate myths, claiming the mounds were works of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, or even refugees from ancient Egypt. The theories were wildly popular, partly because they fit into biblical or classical frameworks familiar to Europeans. Archaeologists today treat them as cultural fantasies, examples of how people project their own stories onto landscapes they don't yet understand. You walk along a slope where surveyors measure with chains, scratching sketches onto parchment. They mutter about giants, lost civilizations, hidden treasures. You feel the mounds bristle, patient but unimpressed, as if saying, "We were always here. You just didn't ask the right people." Historians still argue how much of the misinterpretation came from genuine ignorance versus a refusal to acknowledge the complexity of indigenous cultures. Either way, the effect was the same: erasure disguised as discovery. Neutral narration offers perspective. Native communities in the region still remembered the builders. Oral traditions, though varied, preserved echoes of mound origins and purposes. Yet, colonial observers often ignored those voices, preferring exotic explanations that suited their worldview. You sigh at the thought. Imagine standing in front of a native elder who says plainly, "Our ancestors made these," and replying, "No, surely it was Vikings." You mutter, 10 out of 10 for confidence, 0 out of 10 for listening. The mounds themselves endured the misunderstanding with silence. Grass thickened, settlers plowed fields, towns sprouted nearby. Some mounds were leveled for roads, some carted away for fill dirt. Yet others remained, stubborn humps on the horizon that refused to vanish. A farmer leaning on his plow might glance at one and shrug, never knowing he was staring at an ancient city's heart. You step into the 19th century, where antiquarians dig greedily, pulling bones and artifacts from chambers, piling them in cabinets of curiosity. Some take measurements, others invent stories whole cloth. Museums sprout with shelves of pipes, copper, and pottery, labeled with theories more imaginative than accurate. You wince at the lack of respect, then laugh darkly at the thought. Imagine someone digging up your house and putting your coffee mug in a glass case labeled "ceremonial chalice of unknown function." The air cools. Evening slides down the valley. You stand at the top of a mound, watching as European settlers build their own city nearby, St. Louis, eventually nicknamed Mound City because so many earthworks dotted its landscape. Neutral narration notes. By the late 1800s, most of St. Louis's mounds were destroyed for development, leaving only a few survivors. Historians still argue whether this was carelessness, greed, or the blind momentum of expansion. Likely it was all three. You kneel and touch the soil again, wondering at the irony. Colonists built new towns while dismissing or dismantling older ones beneath their feet. The mounds watched it all in silence, carrying memories no diary captured. Still, the misinterpretations carried unintended consequences. As fanciful as they were, they drew attention. Writers, surveyors, and collectors described the mounds to wider audiences, sparking curiosity that would, eventually, lead to serious study. The legends of lost races faded slowly, giving way, imperfectly, haltingly, to recognition that the ancestors of native nations built them. You rise, brushing dirt from your hands. Behind you, the grass sways on Monk's Mound. Ahead, the voices of scholars grow louder, pens scratching, debates raging. The age of rediscovery has begun, with all its arguments, errors, and revelations. You walk onward, leaving behind the chatter of explorers and settlers, and the night air grows thick with the rustle of papers. Lamps glow in study rooms, shelves bend under the weight of dusty tomes, and a new chorus rises, not of drums or flutes, but of scholars debating across centuries. The mounds are no longer just curious hills or whispered legends. They are subjects of study, objects of rediscovery. Neutral narration steadies the scene. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, archaeology in North America began shifting from speculation to science. Surveys, excavations, and careful mapping replaced fanciful tales. One mainstream fact: in 1894, Cyrus Thomas of the Smithsonian published a landmark report concluding firmly that Native American peoples, not lost races, built the mounds. His work helped dismantle centuries of myth. You exhale slowly, realizing how long it took for the obvious truth to be heard. You picture Thomas leaning over yellowed notes, muttering through soil samples, sighing at yet another wild claim of Atlanteans. You grin softly. Imagine dedicating your career to proving dirt mounds were, in fact, made of dirt by people who lived here. Exhausting, but necessary. Yet, even as science took root, arguments never ceased. Some researchers focused on Adena circles, others on Hopewell trade networks, still others on Mississippian urbanism. Excavations revealed astonishing finds: effigy pipes carved with animals so lifelike you could name the species, copper breastplates hammered thin as paper, mica sheets shimmering like starlight, ceremonial plazas laid out with cosmic precision. And still the question remained, what bound these elements together? Historians still argue whether mound cultures were loosely related traditions or connected by deeper religious and political systems spanning the continent. A quirky tidbit whispers in the corner. Early archaeologists sometimes carted entire mounds away, basket by basket, not just for study, but for city development. In one case, workers built a baseball field over a mound site. You laugh quietly. Somewhere, a 1,000-year-old burial just became left field. Talk about home field advantage. You stroll through a library of voices. Some scholars describe the mound builders as ingenious engineers, aligning earthworks with solstices and lunar standstills. Others emphasize their role as religious visionaries, mapping the cosmos in soil. A third group stresses politics, plazas and mounds as stages for authority, ceremonies that reinforced power. You nod slowly, sensing each theory carries truth, like shards of pottery belonging to the same vessel. Neutral narration continues. By the mid-20th century, radiocarbon dating gave archaeologists new precision. Timelines sharpened, separating Adena from Hopewell, Hopewell from Mississippian. Cultures that had once been blurred together gained clearer identities. But clarity also deepened the mystery. What caused their rises and falls? What did their symbols truly mean? Historians still argue whether collapse came from climate, conflict, disease, or shifting spiritual currents. You wander into a modern museum gallery. Glass cases glow softly, pipes, copper plates, shell beads, ceremonial masks. Visitors murmur reverently, pausing before each display. A child presses her face to the glass, wide-eyed, as her parent reads the plaque aloud. You smile at the scene. Proof that humans will always squint at shiny objects and wonder what secrets they hold. A projector plays a reconstruction of Cahokia at its height, fields golden with maize, Monk's Mound towering, wood-henge posts catching dawn. The animation loops, and you feel both awe and melancholy, awed at the scope, saddened that such majesty is only a shadow now. Yet the shadow speaks. A quirky whisper surfaces from recent decades. Fringe theorists still propose wild ideas: aliens building mounds, secret underground tunnels to other worlds. They thrive on television specials, blending speculation with spectacle. You chuckle softly, shaking your head. Imagine explaining to the original builders that one day people would think little green men did their landscaping. Insulting, really, but oddly flattering. Neutral narration adds one last note. In 1982, Cahokia Mounds was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognition of its global importance. Today, visitors walk the paths, climb the mound, and watch the sunrise at reconstructed wood-henge circles. The ancient city is no longer just forgotten. It is studied, honored, and preserved, even as debates continue about its deeper meanings. You close your eyes and breathe. The arc has shifted again, from building to flourishing, to decline, to misinterpretation, to rediscovery. The story is not neat, but it is whole. The mounds hold every layer: soil and bone, myth and fact, silence and voice. When you open your eyes, the lights of the gallery fade. You stand once more in the grassy field, the mounds rising in moonlight. Their patience hums in the air, as if they know the arguments, the books, the voices, all of it, and still wait calmly for the next visitor to listen. Ahead lies the present, where these shapes endure in parks and neighborhoods, quiet but unbroken. You take one last step through time, and the world folds into the present. The plaza is gone, the wooden circles have rotted, the feasts are silent, yet the earth still rises. Grass drapes across the mounds like a blanket, trees root along their edges, and park benches now sit where dancers once spun. You stand in the modern light of day, hearing cars hum faintly from nearby roads, but before you, the ancient hills endure. Neutral narration offers grounding. Today, sites like Cahokia Mounds in Illinois, Moundville in Alabama, and Etowah in Georgia are protected parks and research centers. One mainstream fact: Cahokia Mounds was named a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1982, recognized as one of the most significant archaeological sites in the Americas. Visitors climb Monk's Mound, walk through interpretive centers, and stand in reconstructed wood-henge circles at sunrise ceremonies. You walk a trail where families stroll with strollers, children skipping ahead, their laughter mixing with the calls of red-winged blackbirds. A guide explains in soft tones that the ground beneath holds centuries of memory. School groups cluster, wide-eyed, pressing faces to the glass cases in the museum. You grin. Somewhere, a Hopewell artisan is probably thrilled his pipe design is still drawing crowds 1,000 years later. The air is gentle here. You sit on a bench, watching the way the light falls across the mounds. You realize how much has changed, not just in the land, but in perception. What were once dismissed as odd hills or mysteries of lost races are now honored as achievements of native peoples, recognized for their scale and meaning. Historians still argue whether Cahokia should be called a city, a theocracy, or a ceremonial center, but the arguments themselves reflect respect for its complexity. A quirky tidbit drifts in. In recent decades, some artists and local communities have staged solstice festivals at wood-henge reconstructions, complete with music, costumes, and coffee in paper cups. You chuckle softly. 1,000 years later, and people are still showing up before dawn to watch the sun rise through posts. Some traditions never die, they just get better snacks. You climb Monk's Mound once more, this time with a modern staircase. The climb is steady, but at the summit the view is the same. Horizon unrolling in every direction, sky stretching wide. On clear days, you glimpse the Arch of St. Louis in the distance, a steel echo of ambition rising where once an earthen one stood. Neutral narration closes the circle. The mounds remain not only as historical artifacts, but as living places. Native nations today still draw identity and heritage from them, seeing them not as relics, but as continuing presences. Preservation efforts struggle against erosion, development, and indifference, but the earth still holds. Historians still argue whether the broader public will ever truly grasp the depth of what was built here, but each visitor adds another voice of remembrance. You sit at the top, legs stretched out, and let the wind wash across your face. The sun lowers, gilding the fields. Children's voices drift up faintly. The mounds glow in soft shadow. They have survived centuries of change, misunderstanding, and silence. They wait still, patient as earth itself. You lean back, letting your eyelids fall. The story is not finished because the land still breathes, but tonight your walk has reached its end. The air settles into quiet and your body sinks deeper into rest. The noise of crowds and the flicker of fires fade into soft memory. What remains are the shapes of the mounds themselves, rounded, steady, holding their place against wind and rain. They rise not in haste but in calm, as though time itself had pressed them into permanence. You imagine lying back in the grass at the foot of one mound. The soil beneath is cool, the stars overhead scattered like beads on a necklace. Insects hum faintly, and the night folds itself around you like a blanket. The air no longer carries the weight of conflict or ceremony. It carries only stillness. Breathing slows. Inhale, the scent of damp earth and clover. Exhale, the weight of centuries leaving your chest. Inhale again, the whisper of wind passing over rounded hills. Exhale, the restless questions, whether of giants or leaders or decline, slipping away like mist. The mounds are no longer stages for power or markers of calendars. Tonight, they are guardians of peace, hills to rest against, gentle silhouettes to guide the eye upward toward quiet stars. They remind you that even great cities return to silence, and silence is not loss. It is a kind of preservation. You let your body soften, shoulders loosen, hands rest, eyelids grow heavy. The mounds wait patiently, and so does sleep. There is no rush. The story of Earth is longer than your story, and tonight you are welcome to borrow a little of its calm. The last sound you notice is the wind brushing grass, like a whisper telling you it is time to drift. The last image is a mound glowing faintly under moonlight, enduring and steady. The end, sweet dreams.